Welcome to the EFF video series. We are welcome today. We're going to be introducing Alan Krystal, Law Office of Alan Krystal. His topic today is what challenges do employers face in the post-COVID-19 world. Let me just state that Equity First Foundation is a not-for-profit organization. We provide financial literacy and financial education for people of all ages and stages. My name is Lisa Strahs-Lorenc. Welcome, Alan, and thanks so much for being here today. This is a really important topic. Considering what we're all going through, employers need to get information, and we appreciate your legal expertise in giving us that information. So thank you, Alan, for being here.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. It's a pleasure being here today, under the circumstances, of course. And really, we're in a situation where the world or our state is going to be trying to, at least in stages, get back to normal. And people are going to be going back to work. Businesses are going to start functioning. Unfortunately, we haven't rid ourselves of this virus. We're still going to have cases. It's still a very ever-present danger, both in society and workplace. And there are going to be challenges once people start going back to work in terms of how employers protect themselves and protect their other employees. And I think the biggest issue is how to identify people who might be sick.
Yes.
And
before we get completely into the issue, I just want people to have your background and your experience because you've been in business law for many years and this is your expertise. So why don't you just...
Well, sure. I have over 30 years of practice. My office has been, I've had an office, I've been on my own probably since 2013. And the focus of my office is business law, but I also do labor and employment litigation for both claimants and businesses. So I do have experience in that area. I've dealt with employment issues in the private sector. So it is an area that I've tried to keep on top of and keep my pulse on.
Very important. And also I want to acknowledge that you're on our board of directors for Equity First Foundation. We appreciate your support and your expertise. So let's get into the topic today. It's really about employers and what they can and can't do for their sick employees. Let's just begin with the employer's obligation to identify employees who are sick and may infect others. Why don't you help us out with this?
Well, there are two challenges here. We're essentially in territory that is largely uncharted, and there's not a lot of direction from the courts. There's not a lot of administrative direction. And the other challenge is a practical challenge because, as we all know by now, it's not easy to determine who might be sick. There's a whole variety, as we all know, there's a variety of symptoms. Some people exhibit mild symptoms. Some people are asymptomatic. So identification is not an easy thing to do. And what it really requires on the employer side is diligence, just monitoring his or her workforce, just to see what employees are exhibiting symptoms consistent with COVID-19, and also establishing a workplace culture where you encourage people to come forward and disclose whether or not they're experiencing symptoms or whether somebody in their household has been diagnosed or is experiencing symptoms. So a lot of it is common sense, a lot of it is basic communication.
So can an employer force certain employees to stay away from the workplace?
It can be done, but it has to really be, well, are you talking about where people are exhibiting symptoms?
Right. Or how do they even know? I mean, how are they going to disclose? Do they have to disclose?
Well, there's a variety of ways of knowing. I mean, obviously, you can't have you can't, unless you're closing a part of your business or all of your business, you can't say employee A, you stay home, employee B, you can't stay home, because it really brings out a variety of potential discrimination-related issues. It all depends upon the nature of what the employee is telling you. It depends upon the nature of what symptoms the employee is exhibiting. One thing you can do as a screening process, in addition to self-disclosing, is there are businesses that physically takes temperatures, and under the law, it is considered a form of it is a form of diagnosis, and generally that's something that's high. It's considered an examination rather, and generally that's regulated strictly, but the rules are relaxed because we are dealing with a pandemic.
Right.
So there is nothing wrong as a blanket policy to require temperatures being taken of employees before they go to the workplace. Again, you have to do it on a consistent basis, and you can't do it on a discriminatory basis. You can't just take the temperature of somebody who's 60 years old and not take the temperature of 30-year-olds. And obviously, you've got to keep records, and you've got to document it. Now, again, I think the thing that bears repeating is we're in uncharted territory. So again, what might create liability for an employer down the line hasn't really been definitively established. I think it's just a matter of exercising common sense, doing the right thing, and making sure whatever you've done is done in a consistent and non-discriminatory manner.
Right. So can I require an employee to be tested for COVID-19?
You really can't do that unless obviously it depends upon the circumstances. It depends upon what they're telling you. It depends upon what you see. I mean, to have a blanket policy to say you've got to be tested, I mean that's way too broad, and that's not going to really pass muster. You can ask an employee how they're feeling. You can ask them if they're symptomatic, and you can possibly do that and ask them to be tested based upon the feedback they give you, based upon the symptoms they're exhibiting.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about allowing workers to work remotely? That's at least an option.
Well, it's an option. It's not a requirement. I mean, you don't have to offer that requirement. I mean, I think in this present day and age, I mean, especially now, we're in a lockdown order, and even in the future, when any return to some sense of normalcy is going to be on an incremental basis, I think it's something that where it's feasible, it's something that should be encouraged. But again, you have to make sure that whatever policy you have isn't done on a discriminatory basis. I mean, you might have certain departments that can operate remotely and some who can't. That's one thing, but you can't cherry pick your employees based upon their age, based upon their gender, based upon their race, and do it that way. So you have to be careful not to do it in a discriminatory manner, because then you run afoul of state and federal anti-discrimination laws.
Sure. So now, can I make an employee disclose that they've been diagnosed? And what do I do about then other employees?
Well, again, I mean, if you have knowledge that somebody has COVID-19, what your obligation to do is to advise the other people in the workplace that there is another employee who might have COVID-19 and who is not being at work in order to protect the other people at the workplace. What you cannot do without the consent of the employee is say who that employee is.
Yep.
Because obviously that violates the employee's rights to privacy. Now, I mean, as a practical matter, if you're a small business and one day, Joe doesn't show up to work, and the next day you're announcing to everybody in the workplace, well, there's somebody who might be suspected of having COVID-19. Obviously, you don't have to be a detective to figure out who that is, and there's not much you can do about it, but you can't put yourself in the position of an employer without the consent of the employee of saying that a specific person has that illness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, can I require medical release before allowing their return?
That is a sticky question. I mean, in a perfect world, you aspire to do that. We're dealing in a reality, though, where where the medical profession is heavily overtaxed, because there's just so much of a drain on their resources and so much on a drain on their administrative ability. So while that is something you might aspire to do and try to do, it
Mhm.
might not be something that is, as a practical matter,
Yes,
possible,
yes.
especially on a timely basis. So one possible alternative is to have an employee self-certify that they are ready and they've been medically cleared to return to work. Obviously, it's not as good
Mhm.
as having a medical certification, but you do have something in writing that provides some means of protection in the event any question should ever arise.
Mhm. This is pretty complicated stuff. Now, can I reduce employees' pay to save costs during the pandemic?
Yes, subject to certain provisions. Obviously, if you have a situation where the compensation is determined pursuant to a contract or pursuant to a collectively bargained agreement, you can't do it unless it's by mutual agreement. You can't do it unilaterally. You also can't do it if the net result of that reduction is going to place that employee below the minimum wage. Finally, if you have a situation where you have an employee who, if you have an employee who is, let's say, classified as an exempt employee, you want to make sure that that reduction in pay doesn't take him below the threshold or her below the threshold, which would jeopardize that status and maybe have that person now be reclassified as an hourly employee. That opens up a whole Pandora's box of worms.
Okay. Now, what if my company closes operations? What type of notice has to be given to the employees?
Now, that's an interesting question. Under the federal warrant statute, generally what you're supposed to do is give 60 days notice of a closing. However, in an unforeseeable business circumstance, which I think it's fair to say that this pandemic qualifies as such, what your requirement would be to give notice as reasonably quick as possible. And so again, you're not going to be held to a strict 60-day standard, but you do have the responsibility of doing it as soon as practical and give as much notice as possible.
Hmm. These are very difficult times, and nobody really knows what the future is going to be and how we're going to bring people back. Um, any other advice to employers about how to make sure that they comply with laws and what their priorities are at this time?
Well, again, this is an ever-changing framework. So this is a situation in which we were all hit with. And just like everybody else, our lawmakers and our courts, they're trying to make sense of it as well. So again, I would advise people to, use their resources, whether it's the internet or whether it's their dealing, whether consulting with their own professionals to keep abreast of it. Call state and local agencies. It's always good to do that due diligence if you're in doubt as to what to do. But as I said before, we are essentially in uncharted waters. So I think any decision that an employer makes has to be made in good faith. It has to be made upon due diligence, reasonableness, and in a fair and non-discriminatory manner.
Hmm. Absolutely. I want to put your contact information up. I want people to feel comfortable calling you and asking you for any additional information. And this way you've been a great resource to us all these years, and we appreciate very much the opportunity to speak with you about this. So it's Alan Krystal, and that's his own law practice. It's 195 Smithtown Boulevard, Suite 101 in Wisconsin. His phone number is 631-780-6555. His cell phone number is 416-7001. And his email is alan@alancrystallaw.com.
Okay, and thank you. And Lisa, I just wanted to point out, I mean, obviously, I'm not in my office right now. I'm working remotely, and I will be for the foreseeable future, but I am reachable for phone inquiries, by email inquiries. I'd be happy to offer anybody a consultation, either a phone consultation, or I could do it via Zoom or another video conferencing platform. And again, I know there are a lot of questions, and if I can help in any way, it's my pleasure to do so. And it's also my pleasure to work with the EFF, because this organization has done so many wonderful things in serving the community. And I think everybody should be aware of and appreciate the work they've done, because they've been invaluable in helping so many people.
Thank you, Alan. We appreciate your support. Be well and take good care of yourself. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Lisa. Stay safe.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.